It's been a long time. I took some time away. Scheduling with family and my 9 to 5 had me kind of preoccupied, so I wasn't able to take care of my baby, which is this podcast, this YouTube video series. The breakdown, UNLV football is what I typically stick to. But I'm back, and it's been a long time. There's been a lot that has happened over the course of the past few weeks that I want to get caught up with in this video. The Rebels are in a good spot right now. They're 4-1 on the season, headed up to Utah State to play a second Mountain West Conference game on the road this time against the Aggies, who are a 1-4 team. But we'll talk about that towards the tail end of this video. But there's a lot of stuff that I want to get into that we've missed that we should talk about. And I know my thoughts and opinions are probably of little value to anybody out there. But if you're watching, obviously you want to hear them. So I want to give them. So let's dive right into it.
Watch the breakdown.
So let's get right to the elephant in the room, or I guess I should say the elephant that's not in the room. Matthew Sluka opting to use his redshirt year and transfer out of UNLV at the third game of the season, after the third game of the season, basically leaving his teammates out to hang and dry. He claimed in a post on X that it was because of representations made by UNLV that were not met upon his arrival to the university. Obviously, the narrative got legs and ran all the way to the national news cycle. College Game Day covered it in the week after this decision by Matthew Sluka. It was the buzz of the sports world. UNLV, again, at the center of the news. And this time, you could say that it was with negative attention. Obviously, the story that got out turned out to not be the story that was the most true. But the media runs with that. And sometimes things get out of hand as far as that goes. UNLV made a statement as well, saying that their representatives, their coaching staff, and everybody involved with the university abided by all the rules and regulations and didn't violate anything, as basically Matthew Sluka accused them of when he made that post and when his agent went on his rant across the nation to anybody that would listen about what Matthew Sluka was allegedly promised by a member of the coaching staff. I have my thoughts on the individual as a player, and I'll dive into those here in my space. Because this is not, a sponsored event by UNLV. I'm not doing this on UNLV's dollar or Learfield's for that matter. But as a player, I will say that was one of the most, and for any player that's doing this, the redshirting 3 games into the season business, I would say that as a player in that locker room, that is the worst form of backstabbing you could possibly do to a teammate. And I think it says a lot to your commitment level as a teammate that you would be willing to basically jeopardize their season, the team season, for your own individual ambitions. And I think that is the antithesis of team player, right? And I'm not saying that to be false or disrespect or slander anybody, but that's the truth of it. If you're doing that, if you're putting your individual ambitions ahead of the team's goals, then you are in fact being a selfish player. So that's the first initial thought. When I heard the news, I heard it on Tuesday night before it kind of went national. We kind of knew that it was going to happen. But hearing that news, my first thought was to the players in the locker room, how much of a gut punch that must be, how much disrespect you must feel, and what kind of personal relationships that had to splinter, or maybe it reveals that they didn't exist. And I don't know which of those is true, but that's what I immediately thought of, how the players in the locker room would respond. And like the captain he is, Jackson Woodard took the lead and immediately embraced his new starting quarterback, Hodge Williams. We found out later in the weeks that Jackson Woodard and Hodge Williams have had a pretty solid relationship off the field since Hodge came back in January or February, whenever he stepped on campus back in the spring. So it was good to see Jackson Woodard take the lead for the locker room. Jonathan Baldwin followed suit. Several other UNLV players took to X to express that they supported Hodge Williams and they were moving on with the next man up mentality. And they did so. I want to address first the way that the story kind of unfolded with Matthew Sluka and how the national narrative kind of took hold and how UNLV was kind of defenseless basically against this onslaught by an agent and a player. I talked about Matthew Sluka and the team, how that impacted the team. Now let's talk about the agent and Matthew Sluka's relationship. I don't know the agent. I don't even know Matthew Sluka for that matter. And I'll be honest in saying that I didn't speak to Matthew Sluka on a regular basis. I don't know him personally. We haven't had conversations. But I will say for any young player, the main story I would take out of this is get representation that cares about you and that is not looking to leech onto you and your success for their own success. This, to me, is one of the situations that used to be from college to the pros. Now it's high school to college, where these agents and representatives are trying to find successful players and trying to find people who have the capacity to enhance their career as an agent. And they use them with a business like mentality and approach to their success in their life. Money isn't everything. I'm not saying that Matthew Sluka was offered $100,000. I don't know that to be true. I wasn't in the room where it happened back in January when he claims these statements were made. I know what I know about the coaching staff, and I know what they said, and I trust what they say to me in saying that the offer was not made. There was no offer for $100,000 made. But what I'm saying is, to make this greater point, agents look at you as a young player as a business venture, as an investment, and they're looking for a return on an investment. Even if the investment or the return on the investment comes at the expense of your life and your happiness. And it's very true. And any sports athlete that has had agent representation, a bad one, I should say, understands that sometimes the agent's mindset and what the agent is willing to do will be at the expense of a good situation for you. I think Matthew Sluka was in a good situation for him at UNLV. I think any quarterback who's playing at UNLV should consider this a good situation. I think an agent or a representative came with ulterior motives and, from what I see, poisoned the mindset and the decision of Matthew Sluka, and I guess emboldened him to basically hold the university hostage and say that he wouldn't play another snap if he was not getting what he thought he deserved, one way or another. I think that decision doesn't get made if you're considering the best interests of the player. But an agent, like I said, is looking at every player as a business investment that they're looking for a big return on. They'll do whatever they can to get that return. Matthew Sluka may go on and land an NIL deal and get, the $300,000 or $100,000 that he was chasing from UNLV. You can consider that a success if you want to. But forever, as a teammate in the locker room, there will be an asterisk next to Matthew Sluka, and he'll have to have an uphill battle to climb as a quarterback to try to win the trust of a locker room, to demonstrate that he's committed wherever he decides to play in his final year of college football. Again, I have a philosophy when it comes to transfers and people entering the portal when leaving UNLV. Thank you for what you did for UNLV. I wish you the best of luck. There's no ill feelings towards Matthew Sluka from me. Kind of. But UNLV has moved on, and they moved on in a big way in a dominant win over Fresno State in their conference opener at home at Allegiant Stadium, 24 to 25,000. I don't have the official number. We're in attendance at Allegiant. It was a great game to watch. UNLV handled business, dominating from start to finish, and putting what is a usually formidable opponent in Fresno State that has had the better of UNLV over the past decade. They put them in their place, and they ran away with a victory. Tim Skipper acknowledged how good UNLV was after the game. It was business-like performance in our introduction to Haj Malik Williams, who had probably the best passing performance to that point of a UNLV quarterback this season. He then followed it up with Syracuse and another solid performance that he had in that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Fresno State, UNLV, immediately in the aftermath of the Matthew Sluka saga, ended up taking care of business on the field, and a good win was all the medicine that UNLV needed. Interestingly, Barry Odom waited until after the win against Fresno, and I think this is very typical of Barry Odom, who wanted to take care of the business at hand first. He prepared a statement to deliver in the postgame, and it really resonated and hit home after the big win, and this is what he said.
I'll comment briefly on the recent departure of one of our players from the team, and the following will be my only comments on the matter. Okay, many have expressed very strong opinions about the events of last week. Without full knowledge of the facts, without full knowledge of the events of last week, and without full knowledge of the rules in the ever-changing, evolving NIL system. And regrettably, some have even used this circumstance as a platform for their own agendas. I respect everyone's right to an opinion, and I won't comment on others' opinions or their motivations for expressing them. Rather, I'll say only that our football program complied with applicable rules, and subject to those rules, we're fully committed to the development and the success of every student athlete in our program. With that, I would like to turn it back over to questions and the team and the great win we had, the 4-0 start, 1-0 in conference. And again, that will be my comments on what took place in the last few days with one of our team members.
I think the stage for that presser was set beautifully by the win. I think it was set beautifully by the two captains on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, and Ricky White and Jackson Woodard, who are the example for every college player of being a selfless person, being a selfless teammate, and putting the team before self. Having those two flanking him while he delivered that message, obviously addressing the Matthew Sluka incident, and obviously emphasizing that this team is a good team and it does not come down to one player. Yes, one player can make an impact, but the team is a good team, and they won against Fresno State as a team. Couldn't have scripted it any better. There will probably be a documentary about this at some point, the NIL saga as a whole, but UNLV's two back-to-back seasons under Barry Odom, I think, should be a spotlight for college football. But that moment, I think, was a perfect moment to deliver that message. Barry Odom hasn't spoken about it since. I think he said what he said, and that's basically what I will agree with, that this team is a team, and they will win as a team, next man up mentality, and that's what it is. So, again, that's my thoughts on that. I echo what Coach Odom said, that there was a lot of narratives, there's a lot of agendas that came out of the Matthew Sluka from people that were not close enough to the truth, people who do not know the UNLV football program, what Eric Harper, what Barry Odom and his staff stand for as far as the integrity of a man. I think I've been close enough to the both of them to kind of observe and see what they're about and the way they approach this thing called college football. I think people really ran with this story and ignored what Barry Odom has been since he stepped at UNLV, and that's a misunderstanding. He was obviously, I would say, he was obviously affected by that aspect of it. That so many people who you would think are close to UNLV as a program or think know what they're talking about when it comes to UNLV, were willing to accept, believe, or even promote the narratives pushed by Matthew Sluka and his representation during that whole saga. And it came at the expense of some negative attention for UNLV. And that's tough. It's tough. But I think, again, the team made it right. Coach Odom handled it with class. He didn't go smearing people publicly. He didn't go on a rant and kick and scream and throw fits about it. He said a prepared statement at that press conference, handled business on the field, and got his team its fourth win on the season against Fresno State. Now, kind of lost in the news cycle with the Matthew Sluka drama was the Mountain West Pac-12, Pac-7, whatever it is called at this point, conference realignment shuffling. Obviously, at this point, we know that there is a Pac-7 conference. The initial offer that poached Mountain West teams like Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, and Colorado State to kind of start this ball rolling of the new Pac-7. UNLV was left on the outskirts looking in. And a lot of people, myself included, were a little bit pissed off about that UNLV, as one of the premier schools in the Mountain West, at least from a football standpoint right now, and with one of the better markets in the country when it comes to sports, was not included in that first initial wave of Pac-12 teams to sign up for the 2026 season. After some time to consider it, and with the news and reporting that there was a departure fee associated with those teams, that was a pretty hefty fee to leave the Mountain West to go to the Pac, putting some things together to help incentivize people staying. And then the Mountain West had a host of teams declare that they were going to stay, and the Mountain West was going to remain in conference and was not going to dissolve, and that no more universities were going to be poached by the Pac. I think UNLV ended up in the best spot that they could in the midst of all of this conference realignment. They remain in the Mountain West. I believe the incentive to stay, there's about $6 million a year that they'll get. So there's a financial compensation that will get paid rather than have to pay to exit and go to the Pac, which is a win for UNLV. And then also as a part of that, they have the ability in the future to, if they desire, seek out a new conference to align themselves with. But I think UNLV and the teams that remained in the Mountain West got the better end of that deal. The talks about the Pac really intensified during this news cycle, during that week. And there was the potential for teams like Memphis to be included in what the new Pac-12 was. That conversation died off. And I think Memphis made the same decision that UNLV's leadership made, in that hey, we're better off where we are here because they're asking us to pay this, absorbent fee to leave our current conference. And then at what? What do we get out of that? And when you step back and look at it, the Pac whatever is really a conference that is strong on the name of what it used to be alone. It's just the name, the Pac 12 or the Pac 10 or the Pac whatever it is at this point, that gets people attracted to it. The market for the Pac is now the Big Ten. Like the major market players in the Pac 12, what made it so relevant on the college football landscape, especially, but really in the college sports, college athletics landscape, were the Oregons, the USCs, the UCLAs, those teams, the Washingtons, even that really took the national landscape and really were the presence for the Pac, are not there. So the majesty of the Pac whatever does not exist with Oregon State and Washington State. That is a statement of fact, and I think Oregon State and Washington State have really stretched the name of the Pac as far as it could go and entice some teams like Boise State to come. And I think Boise State is a fantastic university, especially from a football standpoint. And they are a key player in the college football landscape. They're ranked at this point number 17 in the nation, I believe. They have a Heisman candidate in Ashton Genty. So they are a program that is near the top or cream of the crop and should get respect. But throwing them in the mix with Oregon State and Washington State does not give you the Power 4 allure or the Power 5 allure that the Pac 12 once had. And that's just true. I think the best possible outcome of this situation between the Mountain West and the Pac 12 would have been a merger of the two conferences. And I think that's what we were kind of hoping that would happen out of this scheduling contract where Oregon State and Washington State are playing the Mountain West teams as a part of the scheduling for the next couple of years. But the fact that that didn't happen, that the merger didn't happen initially, and the fact that Oregon State and Washington State tried to instead poach teams and reclaim their glory as the Pac, I think had some selfish ambition to it and wasn't really looking at the totality of the landscape. And now both conferences, I think, are less than what they could have been if they had decided to merge. But as far as UNLV goes, I think they find themselves in a good spot. Obviously, in the weeks that followed that initial wave, UTEP has joined an agreement with the Mountain West for 2026, and Hawaii has joined as a full member, which the complications around Hawaii as a university and what they are as far as their conference is a little complicated, and I can't really explain it here, but UNLV keeps the Ninth Island Showdown as a conference game, which is major. They keep the Cannon game against Reno as a conference game, which is another big thing. A lot of these conference realignments ended up losing those conference games as a part of the rivalry circuit. So UNLV got to keep both of the rivals in this move. So that is a big thing for the university and the school spirit tradition that all of that entails. But I think UNLV finds themselves in a good spot staying in the Mountain West, potentially down the road, maybe if conference realignment keeps shifting, and it will keep shifting. There'll be changes every year, it seems like. But I think UNLV will find themselves in a good position to be able to make another jump. In that shuffle, I think one of the things that people were concerned about was where Barry Odom would like to be. I think the perception, or there's some speculation that Barry Odom wants to be a part of a Power 4 university, that he wants to go somewhere where football is king. He comes from the SEC, so obviously there is the sentiment that he may want to go back someday and be in Arkansas or in Missouri or somewhere where he has some roots down. Obviously, that is a concern. And keeping a coach as valuable as Barry Odom and his assistants, and Brennan Marion, Mike Shear, James Shebest is going to be someone who's going to be tough to keep around as well. But keeping this group together is a concern. And the conference realignment, I think, does play a part in that. I think stability is one thing that people in any employment field want to have. And to be able to have a stable base to say, this is where I am, this is where I can be, this is what I get. I understand what the deal is. If there's a team that's teetering back and forth between conferences, that doesn't give the perception or the feeling of a stable situation. So I think now that it's settled, at least UNLV has some stability as far as their conference and where they're going to be. But the advancement into a conference like the Big 12 or into a conference that turns out to be a Power 4 or Power 5 conference, I think could have gone a long way towards the security blanket that fans feel in keeping Barry Odom. I will say this. Financially, UNLV will have the ability to give Barry Odom enough money. Will they be able to get into a bidding war against an SEC team? I don't think so. But I think whatever Barry Odom defines as enough, UNLV will be able to match that financially. I think the community of UNLV is growing, but it is not to the point where I would say I'm comfortable with football, and the traditions around football are what any coach desires as the end goal. Barry Odom has been instrumental in building what UNLV is right now. I don't think he believes it's there yet. And if I'm being honest, I don't believe it's there yet. And I think that matters when you're talking about a coach wanting to stay, keep his family involved in a community. College football is growing in UNLV, and we're getting national attention. We're winning football games. Being ranked for the first time last week was awesome. Obviously, it was short-lived because we're no longer ranked. But I think the atmosphere of college football is something that Barry Odom values. I think his family values it. And I think if UNLV can get there to where the atmosphere of college football is elite, I think that plays a bigger role than people give it credit for as far as keeping Barry Odom and his staff around. How do we get there? I don't know. But I will say that the game against Syracuse, there was 30,000 fans in attendance, and Barry Odom was very adamant after the game in saying that the atmosphere was amazing. The recruits that were there in attendance agreed with that and thought that it was amazing. I was there. I watched the game, and although UNLV didn't win, and I was devastated by that, the atmosphere was amazing. My wife and my kids, this was their first game of the year. They go to 3 every year. This was number 1. They went to this game, and my wife told me after that the atmosphere was just different. It felt better. It felt the energy of a college football game, which is awesome. So it's building. It's getting there. The tailgate scene, the student section, everything is getting better. I just want it to be at an elite place, which we should. We should be able to get there. Las Vegas is a budding community with a major sports market. I think college football is finally a winner at UNLV. And I think we as a community should show up and show out and make our presence felt when it comes to Barry Odom feeling the love, feeling that tradition, feeling the elite level of support for the football program. I think we can get there, and I think that will play a big role in keeping Barry Odom. I digress. On to the first loss of the season. Syracuse Orange come to Allegiant and pull off what would be considered an upset on the road against a non-conference opponent. Syracuse moves to 4-1. UNLV drops to 4-1. Couldn't remain perfect on the season. And as Coach Odom told us in the coaches show this week, the only thing that is not on the list for UNLV to achieve this year at this point after the loss is an undefeated season. Every other goal that they have is still out in front of them. And I think he's spent this week kind of flipping that message on himself, moving on to the next opponent in Utah State. But talking a little bit about that Syracuse game, Kyle McCord showed that he is one of the elite quarterbacks in all of college football. Obviously, the Ohio State transfer was talented, and we knew that based on his year at Ohio State. But the numbers he is putting up as the primary focus of this Syracuse offense are kind of ridiculous. He's near the top of every statistical category as a quarterback this year, and you can put him ahead of the guys like Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, who are in the running for the Heisman. People are considering him as a dark horse if Syracuse keeps up this season as a Power 4 school. If he goes on to the ACC schedule and dominates the way he has so far in the season, I think he will end up with a ticket to New York. But in the game against UNLV, Syracuse was 11 of 18 on third downs. That is a astronomical rate of third downs. Just having that many third downs in a single game is crazy. And then that conversion rate was really the story of the game. UNLV defensively just couldn't get Syracuse off the field on third downs. And some of those third and fourth downs, there were 2 of 3 on fourth down. Some of those third and fourth down conversions ended up to be the difference in the ball game. Now, some of those conversions came because of some laundry on the field. Let's be clear. The flags helped Syracuse come away with that win. UNLV had 9 penalties for over 100 yards, and I think 3 of them were questionable at best and ended up being backbreaking in terms of keeping Syracuse drives alive in very key spots. The number one I will talk about, of course, is the roughing the passer at the end of the game. That was probably the most egregious penalty of the lot, and it ended up being a third down conversion that kept Syracuse's overtime possession alive and ended up with them scoring a touchdown to win the game in overtime. So it wasn't roughing the passer, to be clear. That's where I stand on it. If you listen to me on the UNLV broadcast on ESPN 1100, 100.9 FM, presented by Learfield, of course, you heard my sentiments and you heard how much I disagreed with that call. It was BS, right? It was not roughing the passer. One, wasn't late. Two, there was no contact to the head and neck area of the passer. And again, it wasn't roughing the passer. So it sucks that targeting was able to be reviewed and removed. I believe that targeting was the reason they called it roughing the passer because I don't think he was late. Whitmore was not late on the hit. So I think the only reason to throw that flag was because you thought it was targeting, which of course would be roughing the passer. The fact that they went to review and removed the targeting made it insult to injury that the roughing had to stand by rule. They cannot, at this point in college football, overturn the roughing the passer penalty just because the targeting is removed. I think that needs to change going forward, and you can learn from that. There is a process for UNLV to send in the questionable calls to the league office and to see if there can be some sort of at least acknowledgement that the calls were false. I don't know if UNLV sent those in. I ventured to imagine they did. I forgot to ask Coach about it during the coaches show. But the only thing that will come from that is basically the officiating head bodies, whatever they call themselves, the unions, would basically respond and say, yes, that was a missed call, or no, that call was legitimate. I would guess that that call, along with the pass interference against Jonathan Baldwin that happened earlier in the game, were probably calls that were sent back and said, yeah, that was probably the wrong call on the field. Doesn't mean anything. The loss will still stand. We can't go back and rerun the downs or anything like that. But I would imagine that that is what UNLV got, was the response that, yes, the calls were missed, and we'll do better next time, essentially. There was another call that happened during the game, early in the game, that was an unsportsmanlike penalty against Casey Kane. And basically it was unsportsmanlike because of deceptive substitution. UNLV made a substitution, Jacob DeJesus, one receiver for one receiver. Jacob DeJesus exits the field, and shortly after, Casey Kane runs to a wide split in the formation near the UNLV sideline. Now, UNLV made a basic substitution, and the play that followed that substitution required wide splits by the receivers. And you'll see teams do this a lot, especially when there's an interior run called to try to expand the defense. Casey Kane takes a wide split outside the numbers on the field, and the official on UNLV sideline throws a flag. He tells UNLV that there is deceptive intent with the substitution. There is a rule in college football: when making a substitution, the player coming onto the field has to come past the numbers before getting back into his formation outside the numbers. Casey Kane did that. He was well inside the numbers at near midfield before taking his position outside the field. That is the way that I have always been taught about the substitution and deception rule. You remember there's a trick play that got run a couple times, mostly at the Pop Warner level, but where you would make a substitution and one of the players on your team would stay on the sideline and there'd be a crowd near the sideline so that the defense didn't know that there was a person there. That's what that rule is really intended to try to eliminate, that play and that kind of deception from the game of football. If a player is running from the middle of the field to the sideline or outside in his formation and he lines up wide in a formation, that's not deceptive. If you didn't pay attention to that, that's your fault defensively. I can't help you with that. You can't say that UNLV is guilty of deceptive intent because that is a subjective call. There is no factual deception that goes on there. It's a player running to his formation, and that's not deceptive at all. So I disagree with that call. I said the three calls that I disagree with. I went over all of them here. The end result is UNLV lost the game, and it's unfortunate. It sucks to come away with a loss. Haj Malik Williams had a stellar game, 21 of 25 passing, I believe, over 200 yards. The first time a quarterback this year has gone over 200 yards passing. Had a couple of touchdowns as well. Ricky White with another 100-plus yard receiving game, made an impact for sure. Had another blocked punt. This one resulted in a touchdown for UNLV. Again, UNLV has scored on special teams in a couple of games consecutively, going back to Fresno State. Ricky's had blocked punts as well, tipped and deflected punts, affected punts. Something that you don't see very often is a punter aborting a punt basically because the defender gets there so quick. That's what Ricky did as well against Syracuse. Ended up going in the stat category as I think it was a sack for Jet Elad, who ended up tackling the punter. But UNLV internally counts it as a turnover generated by the special team. So Ricky White's been a monster on special teams, had another good performance. UNLV put up 41 points in a losing effort in overtime at home. Tough loss, but if you could have told me that UNLV would come out of the non-conference slate at 4-1, having knocked off Kansas, Houston, Fresno State, and sitting at 4-1 after a loss and a close one to Syracuse, I would be okay with that. I would be actually pretty satisfied with that if you said that was a preseason projection. Obviously, again, everything for UNLV is in front of them. Boise State is going to be a quality opponent. Oregon State will also be a quality opponent in the upcoming future. Utah State is the business at hand. They're 1-4, but they have the potential to be an explosive team, especially on the road. It's their homecoming game, so there's a lot of elements of this game that are dangerous that will force UNLV to lock in, focus on the Aggies, and make sure they get back to the winning circle after week 6. So UNLV on the road against Utah State is the business at hand. Still very much in contention for the Mountain West Championship game. Still very much in contention for a spot in the college football playoff if they handle business the rest of the way out. That's a storyline that will follow kind of in the background for this season. Obviously, the goal for UNLV is to win the conference championship. Where they end up after doing that, as far as the college football playoff, will be for other people to decide. But if UNLV handles their business, they should be the champions of the Mountain West, or at least have a spot at the dance. Boise State looks to be on a collision course with UNLV. So that should be a fun one later on in October. But right now, I'm getting ready to head up to Utah State. If you're listening to this, I'm probably already there in Logan, Utah, getting ready for the game. 6 p.m. kickoff Pacific time. Our pregame show on the UNLV Sports Network presented by Learfield on ESPN 1100, 100.9 FM will kick off at 5 p.m. So an hour before kickoff, we'll get you set. Myself, Matt Neverett, Steve Cofield will be on the call. It will be a fun one. Hopefully UNLV can get back to some winning, get back to some exciting football. 2 road games in a row before coming back to Allegiant for the big one against Boise State. But that's it for this episode. I was kind of long-winded on it. There's a lot that I went through to catch up and get you up to speed. What's been going on with UNLV? Obviously, you've been tuned in. You've been there for it all. But I just wanted to give you my thoughts here in episode 6 of The Breakdown UNLV. Thanks for listening. See you next time.